Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. Part 3. Chapter 32. A Horse Fair. No doubt a horse fair is a very amusing place to those who have nothing to lose. At any rate there is plenty to see. Long strings of young horses out of the country, fresh from the marshes, and droves of shaggy little Welsh ponies, no higher than Merrylegs, and hundreds of cart horses of all sorts, some of them with their long tails braided up and tied with scarlet cord, and a good many like myself, handsome and high-bred, but fallen into the middle class through some accident or blemish, unsoundness of wind, or some other complaint. There were some splendid animals quite in their prime, and fit for anything. They were throwing out their legs and showing off their paces in high style, as they were trotted out with the leading rein, the groom running by the side. But round in the background there were a number of poor things, sadly broken down with hard work, with their knees knuckling over, and their hind legs swinging out at every step. And there were some very dejected-looking old horses, with the underlip hanging down, and the ears lying back heavily, as if there were no more pleasure in life, and no more hope. There were some so thin that you might see all their ribs, and some with old sores on their backs and hips. These were sad sights for a horse to look upon, who knows not but he may come to the same state. There was a great deal of bargaining, a running up and beating down, and if a horse may speak his mind so far as he understands, I should say there were more lies told and more trickery at that horse fair than a clever man could give an account of. I was put with 2 or 3 other strong, useful-looking horses, and a good many people came to look at us. The gentlemen always turned away from me when they saw my broken knees, though the man who had me swore it was only a slip in the stall. The first thing was to pull my mouth open, then to look at my eyes, then to feel all the way down my legs, and give me a hard feel of the skin and flesh, and then try my paces. It was wonderful what a difference there was in the way these things were done. Some did it in a rough, off-hand way, as if one was only a piece of wood, while others would take their hands gently over one's body, with a pat now and then, as much as to say, by your leave. Of course, I judged a good deal of the buyers by their manners to myself. There was one man, I thought, if he would buy me, I should be happy. He was not a gentleman, nor yet one of the loud flashy sort that call themselves so. He was rather a small man, but well made, and quick in all his motions. I knew in a moment by the way he handled me that he was used to horses. He spoke gently, and his grey eye had a kindly, cheery look in it. It may seem strange to say, but it is true all the same, that the clean, fresh smell there was about him made me take to him. No smell of old beer and tobacco, which I hated, but a fresh smell, as if he had come out of a hayloft. He offered £23 for me, but that was refused, and he walked away. I looked after him, but he was gone, and a very hard-looking, loud-voiced man came. I was dreadfully afraid he would have me, but he walked off. 2 or 3 more came who did not mean business. Then the hard-faced man came back again, and offered £23. A very close bargain was being driven, for my salesman began to think he should not get all he asked, and must come down. But just then the grey-eyed man came back again. I could not help reaching out my head toward him. He stroked my face kindly. "Well, old chap," he said, "I think we should suit each other. I'll give 24 for him." "Say 25 and you shall have him." 24.10, said my friend, in a very decided tone, and not another 6pence. Yes or no? "Done," said the salesman, "and you may depend upon it there's a monstrous deal of quality in that horse, and if you want him for cab work he's a bargain." The money was paid on the spot, and my new master took my halter and led me out of the fair to an inn, where he had a saddle and bridle ready. He gave me a good feed of oats, and stood by while I ate it, talking to himself and talking to me. Half an hour after we were on our way to London, through pleasant lanes and country roads, until we came into the great London thoroughfare, on which we travelled steadily, till in the twilight we reached the great city. The gas lamps were already lighted. There were streets to the right, and streets to the left, and streets crossing each other, for mile upon mile. I thought we should never come to the end of them. At last, in passing through one, we came to a long cab stand, where my rider called out in a cheery voice, "Good night, governor." "Halloo!" cried a voice. "Have you got a good one?" "I think so," replied my owner. "I wish you luck with him." "Thank you, governor," and he rode on. We soon turned up one of the side streets, and about halfway up that we turned into a very narrow street, with rather poor-looking houses on one side, and what seemed to be coach-houses and stables on the other. My owner pulled up at one of the houses and whistled. The door flew open, and a young woman, followed by a little girl and boy, ran out. There was a very lively greeting as my rider dismounted. "Now then, Harry, my boy, open the gates, and mother will bring us the lantern." The next minute they were all standing round me in a small stable yard. "Is he gentle, father?" "Yes, Dolly, as gentle as your own kitten. Come and pat him." At once the little hand was patting about all over my shoulder without fear. How good it felt! "Let me get him a bran mash while you rub him down," said the mother. "Do, Polly, it's just what he wants, and I know you've got a beautiful mash ready for me." "Sausage dumpling and apple turnover," shouted the boy, which set them all laughing. I was led into a comfortable, clean-smelling stall, with plenty of dry straw, and after a capital supper I lay down, thinking I was going to be happy. Chapter 33. A London Cab Horse. Jeremiah Barker was my new master's name, but as everyone called him Jerry, I shall do the same. Polly, his wife, was just as good a match as a man could have. She was a plump, trim, tidy little woman, with smooth dark hair, dark eyes, and a merry little mouth. The boy was 12 years old, a tall, frank, good-tempered lad, and little Dorothy, Dolly they called her, was her mother all over again at 8 years old. They were all wonderfully fond of each other. I never knew such a happy, merry family before or since. Jerry had a cab of his own, and 2 horses which he drove and attended to himself. His other horse was a tall white, rather large-boned animal called Captain. He was old now, but when he was young he must have been splendid. He still had a proud way of holding his head and arching his neck. In fact, he was a high-bred, fine-mannered, noble old horse, every inch of him. He told me that in his early youth he went to the Crimean War. He belonged to an officer in the cavalry, and used to lead the regiment. I will tell more of that hereafter. The next morning, when I was well groomed, Polly and Dolly came into the yard to see me and make friends. Harry had been helping his father since the early morning, and had stated his opinion that I should turn out to be a regular brick. Polly brought me a slice of apple, and Dolly a piece of bread, and made just as much of me as if I had been the Black Beauty of olden time. It was a great treat to be petted again, and talked to in a gentle voice, and I let them see as well as I could that I wished to be friendly. Polly thought I was very handsome, and a great deal too good for a cab, if it were not for the broken knees. "Of course there's no one to tell us whose fault that was," said Jerry, "and as long as I don't know I shall give him the benefit of the doubt, for a firmer, neater stepper I never rode. We'll call him Jack, after the old one, shall we, Polly?" "Do," she said, "for I like to keep a good name going." Captain went out in a cab all morning. Harry came in after school to feed me and give me water. In the afternoon I was put into the cab. Jerry took as much pains to see if the collar and bridle fitted comfortably as if he had been John Manley over again. When the crupper was let out a hole or two, it all fitted well. There was no check rein, no curb, nothing but a plain ring snaffle. What a blessing that was! After driving through the side street, we came to the large cab stand where Jerry had said good night. On one side of this wide street were high houses with wonderful shop fronts, and on the other was an old church and churchyard surrounded by iron palisades. Alongside these iron rails a number of cabs were drawn up, waiting for passengers. Bits of hay were lying about on the ground. Some of the men were standing together talking, some were sitting on their boxes reading the newspaper, and one or two were feeding their horses with bits of hay and giving them a drink of water. We pulled up in the rank at the back of the last cab. 2 or 3 men came round and began to look at me and pass their remarks. "Very good for a funeral," said one. "Too smart-looking," said another, shaking his head in a very wise way. "You'll find out something wrong one of these fine mornings, or my name isn't Jones." "Well," said Jerry pleasantly, "I suppose I need not find it out until it finds me out, eh? And if so, I'll keep up my spirits a little longer." Then there came up a broad-faced man, dressed in a great grey coat with great grey cape and great white buttons, a grey hat and a blue comforter loosely tied around his neck. His hair was grey too, but he was a jolly-looking fellow, and the other men made way for him. He looked me all over, as if he had been going to buy me, and then, straightening himself up with a grunt, he said, "He's the right sort for you, Jerry. I don't care what you gave for him. He'll be worth it." Thus my character was established on the stand. This man's name was Grant, but he was called Grey Grant, or Governor Grant. He had been the longest on that stand of any of the men, and he took it upon himself to settle matters and stop disputes. He was generally a good-humoured, sensible man, but if his temper was a little out, as it was sometimes when he had drunk too much, nobody liked to come too near his fist, for he could deal a very heavy blow. The first week of my life as a cab-horse was very trying. I had never been used to London, and the noise, the hurry, the crowds of horses, carts, and carriages that I had to make my way through made me feel anxious and harassed. But I soon found that I could perfectly trust my driver, and then I made myself easy and got used to it. Jerry was as good a driver as I have ever known, and what was better, he took as much thought for his horses as he did for himself. He soon found out that I was willing to work and do my best, and he never laid the whip on me unless it was gently drawing the end of it over my back when I was to go on, but generally I knew this quite well by the way in which he took up the reins, and I believe his whip was more frequently stuck up by his side than in his hand. In a short time I and my master understood each other as well as horse and man can do. In the stable, too, he did all that he could for our comfort. The stalls were the old-fashioned style, too much on the slope, but he had 2 movable bars fixed across the back of our stalls, so that at night, and when we were resting, he just took off our halters and put up the bars, and thus we could turn about and stand whichever way we pleased, which is a great comfort. Jerry kept us very clean, and gave us as much change of food as he could, and always plenty of it. And not only that, but he always gave us plenty of fresh, clean water, which he allowed to stand by us both night and day, except, of course, when we came in warm. Some people say that a horse ought not to drink all he likes, but I know if we are allowed to drink when we want, we drink only a little at a time, and it does us a good deal more good than swallowing down half a bucketful at a time, because we have been left without till we are thirsty and miserable. Some grooms will go home to their beer, and leave us for hours with our dry hay and oats, and nothing to moisten them. Then, of course, we gulp down too much at once, which helps to spoil our breathing, and sometimes chills our stomachs. But the best thing we had here was our Sundays for rest. We worked so hard in the week that I do not think we could have kept up to it but for that day. Besides, we had then time to enjoy each other's company. It was on these days that I learned my companion's history. Chapter 34. An Old Warhorse. Captain had been broken in and trained for an army horse. His first owner was an officer of cavalry going out to the Crimean War. He said he quite enjoyed the training with all the other horses, trotting together, turning together to the right hand or the left, halting at the word of command, or dashing forward at full speed at the sound of the trumpet or signal of the officer. He was, when young, a dark, dappled iron grey, and considered very handsome. His master, a young, high-spirited gentleman, was very fond of him, and treated him from the first with the greatest care and kindness. He told me he thought the life of an army horse was very pleasant, but when it came to being sent abroad over the sea in a great ship, he almost changed his mind. "That part of it," said he, "was dreadful. Of course we could not walk off the land into the ship, so they were obliged to put strong straps under our bodies, and then we were lifted off our legs in spite of our struggles, and were swung through the air over the water to the deck of the great vessel. There we were placed in small, close stalls, and never for a long time saw the sky, or were able to stretch our legs. The ship sometimes rolled about in high winds, and we were knocked about, and felt bad enough. However, at last it came to an end, and we were hauled up and swung over again to the land. We were very glad, and snorted and neighed for joy, when we once more felt firm ground under our feet. We soon found that the country we had come to was very different from our own, and that we had many hardships to endure besides the fighting, but many of the men were so fond of their horses that they did everything they could to make them comfortable, in spite of snow, wet, and all things out of order. "But what about the fighting?" said I. "Was not that worse than anything else?" "Well," said he, "I hardly know. We always liked to hear the trumpet sound and be called out, and were impatient to start off, though sometimes we had to stand for hours, waiting for the word of command. And when the word was given, we used to spring forward as gaily and as eagerly as if there were no cannonballs, bayonets, or bullets. I believe, so long as we felt our rider firm in the saddle, and his hand steady on the bridle, not one of us gave way to fear, not even when the terrible bombshells whirled through the air and burst into 1,000 pieces. I, with my noble master, went into many actions together without a wound, and though I saw horses shot down with bullets, pierced through with lances, and gashed with fearful sabre cuts, though we left them dead on the field, or dying in the agony of their wounds, I don't think I feared for myself. My master's cheery voice, as he encouraged his men, made me feel as if he and I could not be killed. I had such perfect trust in him that while he was guiding me I was ready to charge up to the very cannon's mouth. I saw many brave men cut down, many fall mortally wounded from their saddles. I had heard the cries and groans of the dying. I had cantered over ground slippery with blood, and frequently had to turn aside to avoid trampling on wounded man or horse. But, until one dreadful day, I had never felt terror. That day I shall never forget. Here old Captain paused for a while, and drew a long breath. I waited, and he went on. It was one autumn morning, and as usual, an hour before daybreak, our cavalry had turned out, ready caparisoned for the day's work, whether it might be fighting or waiting. The men stood by their horses waiting, ready for orders. As the light increased, there seemed to be some excitement among the officers, and before the day was well begun, we heard the firing of the enemy's guns. Then one of the officers rode up and gave the word for the men to mount, and in a second every man was in his saddle, and every horse stood expecting the touch of the rein or the pressure of his rider's heels, all animated, all eager, but still we had been trained so well that, except by the champing of our bits and the restive tossing of our heads from time to time, it could not be said that we stirred. My dear master and I were at the head of the line, and as all sat motionless and watchful, he took a little stray lock of my mane, which had turned over on the wrong side, laid it over on the right, and smoothed it down with his hand. Then patting my neck, he said, "We shall have a day of it to-day, Bayard, my beauty, but we'll do our duty as we have done." He stroked my neck that morning more, I think, than he had ever done before, quietly on and on, as if he were thinking of something else. I loved to feel his hand on my neck. and arched my crest proudly and happily. But I stood very still, for I knew all his moods, and when he liked me to be quiet and when gay. I cannot tell all that happened on that day, but I will tell of the last charge that we made together. It was across a valley, right in front of the enemy's cannon. By this time we were well used to the roar of heavy guns, the rattle of musket fire, and the flying of shot near us, but never had I been under such a fire as we rode through on that day. From the right, from the left, and from the front, shot and shell poured in upon us. Many a brave man went down. Many a horse fell, flinging his rider to the earth. Many a horse without a rider ran wildly out of the ranks, then, terrified at being alone, with no hand to guide him, came pressing in among his old companions, to gallop with them to the charge. Fearful as it was, no one stopped, no one turned back. Every moment the ranks were thinned, but as our comrades fell, we closed in to keep them together, and instead of being shaken or staggered in our pace, our gallop became faster and faster as we neared the cannon. My master, my dear master, was cheering on his comrades with his right arm raised on high, when one of the balls whizzing close to my head struck him. I felt him stagger with the shock, though he uttered no cry. I tried to check my speed, but the sword dropped from his right hand, the rein fell loose from the left, and sinking backward from the saddle he fell to the earth. The other riders swept past us, and by the force of their charge I was driven from the spot. I wanted to keep my place by his side, and not leave him under that rush of horses' feet, but it was in vain, and now, without a master or a friend, I was alone on that great slaughter-ground. Then fear took hold on me too, and I trembled as I had never trembled before, and I too, as I had seen other horses do, tried to join in the ranks and gallop with them, but I was beaten off by the swords of the soldiers. Just then a soldier whose horse had been killed under him caught at my bridle and mounted me, and with this new master I was again going forward, but our gallant company was cruelly overpowered, and those who remained alive after the fierce fight for the guns came galloping back over the same ground. Some of the horses had been so badly wounded that they could scarcely move from the loss of blood. Other noble creatures were trying on 3 legs to drag themselves along, and others were struggling to rise on their forefeet when their hind legs had been shattered by shot. After the battle the wounded men were brought in, and the dead were buried. "And what about the wounded horses?" I said. "Were they left to die?" "No. The army farriers went over the fields with their pistols and shot all that were ruined. Some that had only slight wounds were brought back and attended to, but the greater part of the noble, willing creatures that went out that morning never came back. In our stables there was only about 1 in 4 that returned. I never saw my dear master again. I believe he fell dead from the saddle. I never loved any other master so well. I went into many other engagements, but was only once wounded, and then not seriously. And when the war was over I came back again to England, as sound and strong as when I went out." I said, "I have heard people talk about war as if it were a very fine thing." "Ah," said he, "I should think they never saw it. No doubt it is very fine when there is no enemy, when it is just exercise and parade and sham fight. Yes, it is very fine then. But when thousands of good, brave men and horses are killed or crippled for life, it has a very different look." "Do you know what they fought about?" said I. "No," he said, "that is more than a horse can understand. But the enemy must have been awfully wicked people, if it was right to go all that way over the sea on purpose to kill them." Chapter 35. Jerry Barker. I never knew a better man than my new master. He was kind and good, and as strong for the right as John Manley, and so good-tempered and merry that very few people could pick a quarrel with him. He was very fond of making little songs and singing them to himself. One he was very fond of was this: "Come father and mother, and sister and brother, come all of you, turn to, and help one another." And so they did. Harry was as clever at stable work as a much older boy, and always wanted to do what he could. Then Polly and Dolly used to come in the morning to help with the cab, to brush and beat the cushions and rub the glass, while Jerry was giving us a cleaning in the yard, and Harry was rubbing the harness. There used to be a great deal of laughing and fun between them, and it put Captain and me in much better spirits than if we had heard scolding and hard words. They were always early in the morning, for Jerry would say, "If you in the morning throw minutes away, you can't pick them up in the course of a day. You may hurry and scurry, and flurry and worry, you've lost them forever, forever and aye." He could not bear any careless loitering and waste of time, and nothing was so near making him angry as to find people who were always late wanting a cab horse to be driven hard to make up for their idleness. One day, two wild-looking young men came out of a tavern close to the stand and called Jerry. "Here, cabby, look sharp, we are rather late. Put on the steam, will you, and take us to the Victoria in time for the 1 o'clock train. You shall have a shilling extra." "I will take you at the regular pace, gentlemen. Shillings don't pay for putting on the steam like that." Larry's cab was standing next to ours. He flung open the door and said, "I'm your man, gentlemen. Take my cab, my horse will get you there all right." And as he shut them in, with a wink toward Jerry, said, "It's against his conscience to go beyond a jog trot." Then slashing his jaded horse, he set off as hard as he could. Jerry patted me on the neck. "No, Jack, a shilling would not pay for that sort of thing, would it, old boy?" Although Jerry was determinedly set against hard driving to please careless people, he always went a good fair pace, and was not against putting on the steam, as he said, if only he knew why. I well remember one morning, as we were on the stand waiting for a fare, that a young man, carrying a heavy portmanteau, trod on a piece of orange peel which lay on the pavement, and fell down with great force. Jerry was the first to run and lift him up. He seemed much stunned, and as they led him into a shop he walked as if he were in great pain. Jerry, of course, came back to the stand, but in about 10 minutes one of the shopmen called him, so he drew up to the pavement. "Can you take me to the South Eastern Railway?" said the young man. "This unlucky fall has made me late, I fear, but it is of great importance that I should not lose the 12 o'clock train. I should be most thankful if you could get me there in time, and will gladly pay you an extra fare." "I'll do my very best," said Jerry heartily, "if you think you are well enough, sir," for he looked dreadfully white and ill. "I must go," he said earnestly. "Please to open the door, and let us lose no time." The next minute Jerry was on the box, with a cheery chirrup to me and a twitch of the rein that I well understood. "Now then, Jack, my boy," said he, "spin along, we'll show them how we can get over the ground, if we only know why." It is always difficult to drive fast in the city in the middle of the day, when the streets are full of traffic, but we did what could be done, and when a good driver and a good horse, who understand each other, are of one mind, it is wonderful what they can do. I had a very good mouth, that is, I could be guided by the slightest touch of the rein, and that is a great thing in London, among carriages, omnibuses, carts, vans, trucks, cabs, and great wagons creeping along at a walking pace, some going one way, some another, some going slowly, others wanting to pass them, omnibuses stopping short every few minutes to take up a passenger, obliging the horse that is coming behind to pull up too, or to pass and get before them. Perhaps you try to pass, but just then something else comes dashing in through the narrow opening, and you have to keep in behind the omnibus again. Presently you think you see a chance, and manage to get to the front, going so near the wheels on each side that half an inch nearer and they would scrape. Well, you get along for a bit, but soon find yourself in a long train of carts and carriages, all obliged to go at a walk. Perhaps you come to a regular block-up, and have to stand still for minutes together till something clears out into a side street or the policeman interferes. You have to be ready for any chance, to dash forward if there be an opening, and be quick as a rat dog to see if there be room, and if there be time, lest you get your own wheels locked or smashed, or the shaft of some other vehicle run into your chest or shoulder. All this is what you have to be ready for. If you want to get through London fast in the middle of the day, it wants a deal of practice. Jerry and I were used to it, and no one could beat us at getting through when we were set upon it. I was quick and bold, and could always trust my driver. Jerry was quick and patient at the same time, and could trust his horse, which was a great thing too. He very seldom used the whip. I knew by his voice, and his click-click when he wanted to get on fast, and by the rein where I was to go, so there was no need for whipping. But I must go back to my story. The streets were very full that day, but we got on pretty well as far as the bottom of Cheapside, where there was a block for 3 or 4 minutes. The young man put his head out and said anxiously, "I think I had better get out and walk. I shall never get there if this goes on." "I shall do all that can be done, sir," said Jerry. "I think we shall be in time. This block-up cannot last much longer, and your luggage is very heavy for you to carry, sir." Just then the cart in front of us began to move on, and then we had a good turn. In and out we went, as fast as horseflesh could do it, and for a wonder had a good clear time on London Bridge, for there was a whole train of cabs and carriages all going our way at a quick trot, perhaps wanting to catch that very train. At any rate, we whirled into the station with many more, just as the great clock pointed 8 minutes to 12 o'clock. "Thank God, we are in time," said the young man. "And thank you too, my friend, and your good horse. You have saved me more than money can ever pay for. Take this extra half-crown." "No, sir, no. Thank you all the same. So glad we hit the time, sir. But don't stay now, sir, the bell is ringing. Here, porter, take this gentleman's luggage. Dover line, 12 o'clock train, that's it." And without waiting for another word, Jerry wheeled me round to make room for other cabs that were dashing up at the last minute, and drew up on one side till the crush was past. "So glad," he said, "so glad. Poor young fellow. I wonder what it was that made him so anxious." Jerry often talked to himself quite loud enough for me to hear when we were not moving. On Jerry's return to the rank, there was a good deal of laughing and chaffing at him for driving hard to the train for an extra fare, as they said, all against his principles, and they wanted to know how much he had pocketed. "A good deal more than I generally get," said he, nodding slyly. "What he gave me will keep me in little comforts for several days." "Gammon," said one. "He's a humbug," said another, preaching to us and then doing the same himself. "Look here, mates," said Jerry. "The gentleman offered me half-a-crown extra, but I didn't take it. 'Twas quite pay enough for me to see how glad he was to catch that train, and if Jack and I choose to have a quick run now and then to please ourselves, that's our business and not yours." "Well," said Larry, "you'll never be a rich man." "Most likely not," said Jerry, "but I don't know that I shall be the less happy for that. I have heard the commandments read a great many times, and I never noticed that any of them said, 'Thou shalt be rich,' and there are a good many curious things said in the New Testament about rich men that I think would make me feel rather queer if I was one of them." "If you ever do get rich," said Governor Gray, looking over his shoulder across the top of his cab, "you'll deserve it, Jerry, and you won't find a curse come with your wealth. As for you, Larry, you'll die poor. You spend too much in whipcord." "Well," said Larry, "what is a fellow to do if his horse won't go without it?" "You never take the trouble to see if he will go without it. Your whip is always going as if you had the St. Vitus dance in your arm, and if it does not wear you out, it wears your horse out. You know you are always changing your horses, and why? Because you never give them any peace or encouragement." "Well, I have not had good luck," said Larry. "That's where it is." "And you never will," said the governor, Good luck is rather particular who she rides with, and mostly prefers those who have got common sense and a good heart. At least that is my experience." Governor Gray turned round again to his newspaper, and the other men went to their cabs. Chapter 36. The Sunday Cab. One morning, as Jerry had just put me into the shafts and was fastening the traces, a gentleman walked into the yard. "Your servant, sir," said Jerry. "Good morning, Mr. Barker," said the gentleman. "I should be glad to make some arrangements with you for taking Mrs. Briggs regularly to church on Sunday mornings. We go to the new church now, and that is rather further than she can walk." "Thank you, sir," said Jerry, "but I have only taken out a 6 days' license, and therefore I could not take a fare on a Sunday. It would not be legal." "Oh," said the other, "I did not know yours was a 6 days' cab, but of course it would be very easy to alter your license. I would see that you did not lose by it. The fact is, Mrs. Briggs very much prefers you to drive her." "I should be glad to oblige the lady, sir, but I had a 7 days' license once, and the work was too hard for me, and too hard for my horses. Year in and year out, not a day's rest, and never a Sunday with my wife and children, and never able to go to a place of worship, which I had always been used to do before I took to the driving box. So for the last 5 years I have only taken a 6 days' license, and I find it better all the way round." "Well, of course," replied Mr. Briggs, "it is very proper that every person should have rest, and be able to go to church on Sundays, but I should have thought you would not have minded such a short distance for the horse, and only once a day. You would have all the afternoon and evening for yourself, and we are very good customers, you know." "Yes, sir, that is true, and I am grateful for all favours, I am sure, and anything that I could do to oblige you or the lady I should be proud and happy to do, but I can't give up my Sundays, sir, indeed I can't. I read that God made man, and he made horses and all the other beasts, and as soon as he had made them, he made a day of rest, and bade that all should rest 1 day in 7. And I think, sir, he must have known what was good for them, and I am sure it is good for me. I am stronger and healthier altogether, now that I have a day of rest. The horses are fresh too, and do not wear up nearly so fast. The 6-day drivers all tell me the same, and I have laid by more money in the savings bank than ever I did before. And as for the wife and children, sir, why, heart alive, they would not go back to the 7 days for all they could see." "Oh, very well," said the gentleman. "Don't trouble yourself, Mr. Barker, any further. I will inquire somewhere else." And he walked away. "Well," says Jerry to me, "we can't help it, Jack, old boy. We must have our Sundays. Polly," he shouted, "Polly, come here." She was there in a minute. "What is it all about, Jerry?" "Why, my dear, Mr. Briggs wants me to take Mrs. Briggs to church every Sunday morning. I say I only have a 6 days' license. He says, get a 7 days' license and I'll make it worth your while. And you know, Polly, they are very good customers to us. Mrs. Briggs often goes out shopping for hours or making calls, and then she pays down fair and honourable like a lady. There's no beating down or making 3 hours into 2 hours and a half, as some folks do. And it is easy work for the horses, not like tearing along to catch trains for people that are always a quarter of an hour too late. And if I don't oblige her in this matter, it is very likely we shall lose them altogether. What do you say, little woman?" "I say, Jerry," says she, speaking very slowly, "I say, if Mrs. Briggs would give you a sovereign every Sunday morning, I would not have you a 7 days' cabman again. We have known what it was to have no Sundays, and now we know what it is to call them our own. Thank God you earn enough to keep us, though it is sometimes close work to pay for all the oats and hay, the licence and the rent besides. But Harry will soon be earning something, and I would rather struggle on harder than we do, than go back to those horrid times when you hardly had a minute to look at your own children, and we never could go to a place of worship together, or have a happy, quiet day. God forbid that we should ever turn back to those times. That's what I say, Jerry." "And that is just what I told Mr. Briggs, my dear," said Jerry, "and what I mean to stick to. So don't go and fret yourself, Polly," for she had begun to cry. I would not go back to the old times if I earned twice as much, so that is settled, little woman. Now, cheer up, and I'll be off to the stand." 3 weeks had passed away after this conversation, and no order had come from Mrs. Briggs, so there was nothing but taking jobs from the stand. Jerry took it to heart a great deal, for of course the work was harder for horse and man. But Polly would always cheer him up, and say, "Never mind, father, never mind. Do your best, and leave the rest. 'Twill all come right, some day or night." It soon became known that Jerry had lost his best customer, and for what reason. Most of the men said he was a fool, but 2 or 3 took his part. "If working men don't stick to their Sunday," said Truman, "they'll soon have none left. It is every man's right and every beast's right. By God's law we have a day of rest, and by the law of England we have a day of rest, and I say we ought to hold to the rights these laws give us, and keep them for our children." "All very well for you religious chaps to talk so," said Larry, "but I'll turn a shilling when I can. I don't believe in religion, for I don't see that your religious folks are any better than the rest." "If they are not better," put in Jerry, "it is because they are not religious. You might as well say that our country's laws are not good because some people break them. If a man gives way to his temper, and speaks evil of his neighbour, and does not pay his debts, he is not religious, I don't care how much he goes to church. If some men are shams and humbugs, that does not make religion untrue. Real religion is the best and truest thing in the world, and the only thing that can make a man really happy, or make the world we live in any better." "If religion was good for anything," said Jones, "it would prevent your religious people from making us work on Sundays, as you know many of them do, and that's why I say religion is nothing but a sham. Why, if it was not for the church and chapel goers, it would be hardly worth while our coming out on a Sunday. But they have their privileges, as they call them, and I go without. I shall expect them to answer for my soul if I can't get a chance of saving it." Several of the men applauded this, till Jerry said, "That may sound well enough, but it won't do. Every man must look after his own soul. You can't lay it down at another man's door like a foundling, and expect him to take care of it. And don't you see, if you are always sitting on your box waiting for a fare, they will say, 'If we don't take him, someone else will,' and he does not look for any Sunday. Of course, they don't go to the bottom of it, or they would see if they never came for a cab it would be no use you standing there. But people don't always like to go to the bottom of things. It may not be convenient to do it, but if you Sunday drivers would all strike for a day of rest, the thing would be done." "And what would all the good people do if they could not get to their favourite preachers?" said Larry. "'Tis not for me to lay down plans for other people," said Jerry, "but if they can't walk so far, they can go to what is nearer, and if it should rain they can put on their mackintoshes as they do on a week-day. If the thing is right, it can be done, and if it is wrong, it can be done without, and a good man will find a way. And that is as true for us cabmen as it is for the churchgoers." Chapter 37. The Golden Rule. 2 or 3 weeks after this, as we came into the yard rather late in the evening, Polly came running across the road with the lantern. She always brought it to him, if it was not very wet. "It has all come right, Jerry. Mrs. Briggs sent her servant this afternoon to ask you to take her out tomorrow at 11 o'clock. I said, yes, I thought so, but we supposed she employed someone else now. Well," said he, "the real fact is, Master was put out because Mr. Barker refused to come on Sundays, and he has been trying other cabs, but there's something wrong with them all. Some drive too fast, and some too slow, and the mistress says there is not one of them so nice and clean as yours, and nothing will suit her but Mr. Barker's cab again." Polly was almost out of breath, and Jerry broke out into a merry laugh. "'Twill all come right some day or night. You were right, my dear, you generally are. Run in and get the supper, and I'll have Jack's harness off and make him snug and happy in no time." After this, Mrs. Briggs wanted Jerry's cab quite as often as before, never, however, on a Sunday. But there came a day when we had Sunday work, and this was how it happened. We had all come home on the Saturday night very tired, and very glad to think that the next day would be all rest, but so it was not to be. On Sunday morning Jerry was cleaning me in the yard, when Polly stepped up to him, looking very full of something. "What is it?" said Jerry. "Well, my dear," she said, "poor Dinah Brown has just had a letter brought to say that her mother is dangerously ill, and that she must go directly if she wishes to see her alive. The place is more than 10 miles away from here, out in the country, and she says if she takes the train she should still have 4 miles to walk. And so weak as she is, and the baby only 4 weeks old, of course that would be impossible. And she wants to know if you would take her in your cab, and she promises to pay you faithfully, as she can get the money." "Tut, tut, we'll see about that. It was not the money I was thinking about, but of losing our Sunday. The horses are tired, and I am tired too. That's where it pinches." "It pinches all round, for that matter," said Polly, "for it's only half Sunday without you. But you know we should do to other people as we should like they should do to us, and I know very well what I should like if my mother was dying. And, Jerry dear, I'm sure it won't break the Sabbath, for if pulling a poor beast or donkey out of a pit would not spoil it, I'm quite sure taking poor Dinah would not do it." "Why, Polly, you are as good as the minister. And so, as I've had my Sunday morning sermon early today, you may go and tell Dinah that I'll be ready for her as the clock strikes 10. But stop, just step round to Butcher Braden's with my compliments, and ask him if he would lend me his light trap. I know he never uses it on the Sunday, and it would make a wonderful difference to the horse." Away she went, and soon returned, saying that he could have the trap and welcome. "All right," said he. "Now put me up a bit of bread and cheese, and I'll be back in the afternoon as soon as I can." "And I'll have the meat pie ready for an early tea instead of for dinner," said Polly, and away she went, while he made his preparations to the tune of "Polly's the Woman and no mistake," of which tune he was very fond. I was selected, and at 10 o'clock we started, in a light high-wheeled gig, which ran so easily that after the 4-wheeled cab it seemed like nothing. It was a fine May day, and as soon as we were out of the town, the sweet air, the smell of the fresh grass, and the soft country roads were as pleasant as they used to be in the old times, and I soon began to feel quite fresh. Dinah's family lived in a small farmhouse up a green lane, close by a meadow with some fine shady trees. There were 2 cows feeding in it. A young man asked Jerry to bring his trap into the meadow, and he would tie me up in the cowshed. He wished he had a better stable to offer. "If your cows would not be offended," said Jerry, "there is nothing my horse would like so well as to have an hour or 2 in your beautiful meadow. He's quiet, and it would be a rare treat for him." "Do, and welcome," said the young man. "The best we have is at your service for your kindness to my sister. We shall be having some dinner in an hour, and I hope you'll come in, though with mother so ill we are all out of sorts in the house." Jerry thanked him kindly, but said as he had some dinner with him, there was nothing he should like so well as walking about in the meadow. When my harness was taken off, I did not know what I should do first, whether to eat the grass, or roll over on my back, or lie down and rest, or have a gallop across the meadow out of sheer spirits at being free, and I did all by turns. Jerry seemed to be quite as happy as I was. He sat down by a bank under a shady tree, and listened to the birds. Then he sang himself, and read out of the little brown book he is so fond of, then wandered around the meadow, and down by a little brook, where he picked the flowers and the hawthorn, and tied them up with long sprays of ivy. Then he gave me a good feed of the oats which he had brought with him, but the time seemed all too short. I had not been in a field since I left poor Ginger at Earlshall. We came home gently, and Jerry's first words were, as we came into the yard, "Well, Polly, I have not lost my Sunday after all, for the birds were singing hymns in every bush, and I joined in the service, and as for Jack, he was like a young colt." When he handed Dolly the flowers, she jumped about for joy. Chapter 38. Dolly and a Real Gentleman. Winter came in early, with a great deal of cold and wet. There was snow or sleet or rain almost every day for weeks, changing only for keen driving winds or sharp frosts. The horses all felt it very much. When it is a dry cold, a couple of good thick rugs will keep the warmth in us, but when it is soaking rain they soon get wet through and are no good. Some of the drivers had a waterproof cover to throw over, which was a fine thing, but some of the men were so poor that they could not protect either themselves or their horses, and many of them suffered very much that winter. When we horses had worked half the day, we went to our dry stables and could rest, while they had to sit on their boxes, sometimes staying out as late as 1 or 2 in the morning if they had a party to wait for. When the streets were slippery with frost or snow, that was the worst for all of us horses. 1 mile of such travelling, with a weight to draw and no firm footing, would take more out of us than 4 on a good road. Every nerve and muscle of our bodies is on the strain to keep our balance, and, added to this, the fear of falling is more exhausting than anything else. If the roads are very bad indeed, our shoes are roughened, but that makes us feel nervous at first. When the weather was very bad, many of the men would go and sit in a tavern close by, and get someone to watch for them, but they often lost a fare in that way, and could not, as Jerry said, be there without spending money. He never went to the Rising Sun. There was a coffee shop near, where he now and then went, or he bought of an old man, who came to our rank with tins of hot coffee and pies. It was his opinion that spirits and beer made a man colder afterward, and that dry clothes, good food, cheerfulness, and a comfortable wife at home were the best things to keep a cabman warm. Polly always supplied him with something to eat when he could not get home, and sometimes he would see little Dolly peeping from the corner of the street to make sure if father was on the stand. If she saw him, she would run off at full speed and soon come back with something in a tin or basket, some hot soup or pudding Polly had ready. It was wonderful how such a little thing could get safely across the street, often thronged with horses and carriages, but she was a brave little maid, and felt it quite an honour to bring father's first course, as he used to call it. She was a general favourite on the street, and there was not a man who would not have seen her safely across the street if Jerry had not been able to do it. One cold, windy day, Dolly had brought Jerry a basin of something hot, and was standing by him while he ate it. He had scarcely begun, when a gentleman, walking toward us very fast, held up his umbrella. Jerry touched his hat in return, gave the basin to Dolly, and was taking off my cloth, when the gentleman hastening up cried out, "No, no, finish your soup, my friend. I have not much time to spare, but I can wait until you have done, and set your little girl safe on the pavement." So saying, he seated himself in the cab. Jerry thanked him kindly, and came back to Dolly. "There, Dolly, that's a gentleman, that's a real gentleman, Dolly. He has got time and thought for the comfort of a poor cabman and a little girl." Jerry finished his soup, set the child across, and then took his orders to drive to Clapham Rise. Several times after that the same gentleman took our cab. I think he was very fond of dogs and horses, for whenever we took him to his own door, 2 or 3 dogs would come bounding out to meet him. Sometimes he came round and patted me, saying in his quiet, pleasant way, "This horse has got a good master, and he deserves it." It was a very rare thing for anyone to notice the horse that had been working for him. I have known ladies to do it now and then, and this gentleman, and 1 or 2 others have given me a pat and a kind word, but 99 persons out of 100 would as soon think of patting the steam engine that drew the train. The gentleman was not young, and there was a forward stoop in his shoulders, as if he was always going at something. His lips were thin and close shut, though they had a very pleasant smile. His eye was keen, and there was something in his jaw and the motion of his head that made one think he was very determined in anything he set about. His voice was pleasant and kind. Any horse would trust that voice, though it was just as decided as everything else about him. One day he and another gentleman took our cab. They stopped at a shop in Street, and while his friend went in, he stood at the door. A little ahead of us on the other side of the street, a cart with 2 very fine horses was standing before some wine vaults. The carter was not with them, and I cannot tell how long they had been standing, but they seemed to think they had waited long enough and began to move off. Before they had gone many paces, the carter came running out and caught them. He seemed furious at their having moved, and with whip and rein punished them brutally, even beating them about the head. Our gentleman saw it all, and stepping quickly across the street, said in a decided voice, "If you don't stop that directly, I'll have you arrested for leaving your horses, and for brutal conduct." The man, who had clearly been drinking, poured forth some abusive language, but he left off knocking the horses about, and taking the reins got into his cart. Meantime our friend had quietly taken a notebook from his pocket, and looking at the name and address painted on the cart, he wrote something down. "What do you want with that?" growled the carter, as he cracked his whip and was moving on. A nod and a grim smile was the only answer he got. On returning to the cab, our friend was joined by his companion, who said laughingly, "I should have thought, Wright, you had enough business of your own to look after, without troubling yourself about other people's horses and servants." Our friend stood still for a moment, and throwing his head a little back, "Do you know why this world is as bad as it is?" "No," said the other. "Then I'll tell you. It is because people think only about their own business, and won't trouble themselves to stand up for the oppressed, nor bring the wrongdoer to light. I never see a wicked thing like this without doing what I can, and many a master has thanked me for letting him know how his horses have been used." "I wish there were more gentlemen like you, sir," said Jerry, "for they are wanted badly enough in this city." After this we continued our journey, and as they got out of the cab, our friend was saying, "My doctrine is this, that if we see cruelty or wrong that we have the power to stop, and do nothing, we make ourselves sharers in the guilt."